Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank Barbara Bishop, our director, and Mike Cabral, and Mikey and Matt with WCAT. I'd like to thank Susan Lees enormously, and my deepest thanks to our panelists. I'm Suzanne Hitchcock-Bryan, and I'm a member of Winthrop Mothers Out Front. And if you please, if you're a member of Winthrop Mothers Out Front, would you please stand up? Yeah. And if you are a Mothers Out Front member from a neighboring community, would you please stand up? Thank you. Okay, a word about Mothers Out Front. Why mothers? Mothers will do anything to protect their children, their grandchildren. We are mothers and others. We all have children we love in our lives, nieces, nephews, friends. We all care about planet Earth. On Wednesday, in this town, there's going to be a neighborhood meeting to discuss climate change vulnerability assessment. And I will be going. And you know what? I'm angry. I'm angry that I, as a resident of a community that's surrounded by water on 3 sides, has to go to this meeting. Now, more than ever, we must act locally. We can halt global warming, and we must. I implore you to listen to what our panelists have to say. Nancy Wilson, give a wave, Nancy. She is one of the leaders of the Stop the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline. She's been arrested twice for protesting. Alice Arena. She's a key leader of the Four River Residents Against the Compressor Station. Margaret Bellafiore is one of the founding members of the Four River Residents Against the Compressor Station. And Reverend Mariama White Hammond is the Ecological Justice Minister at Bethel AME Church. She's a member of the leadership team of Mass Interfaith Coalition for Climate Action. She was also arrested, and she's been to Standing Rock. We will take questions at the end. And Nancy, if you would take it away.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. I really appreciate your interest. These fights are many, and they're across the state and they're across our nation now. And I don't know of very many communities who are in the path of the Algonquin Incremental Market or any of the Spectra projects or the Stop the Northeast or the Northeast Access pipeline who are not fighting. And I was actually inspired by this little quote you have by Michael Bloomberg, a former mayor of New York and a very wealthy man. It says that cities, states, businesses, and consumers are busy cutting emissions. That's what we're doing. That's what all the smart people are doing. That's what all the people who care about the planet are doing. They're busy trying to stop emissions, to stop global warming, to take action against this threat to all of us. I mean, this is the sine qua non of causes. When I hear people talk about, there's so many causes, I can't get involved in this cause, I can't go over there and fight, I can't stand with them. Well, this is the one, because if we don't have a planet, we got nothing. So, for people who want to join a cause, I would strongly encourage you to join this one, because this is just a fight. This is a fight for our future and our survival and the survival of our children. So, it's so interesting that just as all of us are working to fight emissions, just as Massachusetts has adopted the global warming standards and a commitment to reduce global warming, and just as some of our representatives and environmentalists across our state and across other states are committing to 100% renewable by 2050, at the same moment, the largest, most powerful richest fossil fuel companies in the world, and all of the infrastructure, political and otherwise, that supports them is in a race, in a gold rush, to make as much money as they possibly can at this moment while they can. So what's going on across our state and in many other states that are affected by this invasion of pipelines is that they are taking advantage of the abundance of ugly, filthy fracked gas, which is its own horrible story, to get it to market to global networks across the universe, across the world. That's what's going on. So when we hear things like we need the gas in Massachusetts, or when you listen to MSNBC at night and see those two people sitting at a kitchen table saying, we can't stand these prices, then let them build those pipelines, okay? That is total effing BS, okay? Because the Attorney General did a study post the West Roxbury lateral pipeline, which was excluded from the study, that said we do not need this gas to meet our energy requirements either commercially or residentially for the foreseeable future. We don't need it. Jamie Eldridge and others, who's a state senator from Western Mass, from Acton area, and others are proposing 100% renewable supply of energy in our state. These things are at odds, and this is the moment we live in. Powerful, influential, rich corporations, the corporatocracy of the fossil fuel industry is being pitted at this moment against citizens who are united for the cause of preserving our planet and moving to renewables. In West Roxbury, what happened, it's a very common story. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that is the deciding body who proves siting and go forward for pipelines, had approved our pipeline, the pipeline that was most affecting us, which happened to be sited opposite a live, active blasting quarry that blasts at seismic levels on a weekly basis. They're having a blast tomorrow. That has cracked foundations, cracked chimneys, flattened whole buildings. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission looked at the study that was proposed and created by the energy company that was putting this forward, and just checked it off and said, go ahead. By the time we learned about where we were in the process, we were really too late to take any action legislatively or in the comment period to directly affect that. Not that we didn't try. We tried, and we're still trying, and we're still working on it. The City of Boston has a suit against the company. This is all going forward in court. We tried on the advocacy level. These are the things that people can do to oppose these things. So petitions and meeting with legislators, meeting with our senators, federal and local, meeting with all of our electeds at up and down, who all oppose this, who all wrote against this, who all voiced their opposition to it, and who tried to, like Stephen Lynch, tried to propose legislation that would allow the people to have a separate voice. All of these things were done. None of it worked. And we're still in this moment where that thing is built. And I am living in the incineration zone at this moment, where this enormous 750 PSI frack gas pipeline comes into a metering and regulating station in a residential area, a residential neighborhood that has 3 schools and a nursing home. That's the power of the fossil fuel industry against the standing of citizens who are most affected by it. So when advocacy fails, when legislation fails, when petitions fail, when all of our efforts at organizing and advocating and helping fail, we take to the streets, and that's why you get arrested. Because you wind up in a position where you only have one choice, and that is to rebel. And you adopt an attitude of deep wrongs require deep action. Extreme wrongs require extreme action. And that's also where we are today. Not just here in Massachusetts and in West Roxbury, and in
Weymouth.
Weymouth, I know it's Weymouth. And across the state for everybody who's fighting these things, and up and down the eastern seaboard, all these people who are fighting these things. That's where we are this is both a micro and a macro state that we're in today. And Alice can tell you a little bit about what's going on in Weymouth and the Fore River frack gas opposition.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Suzanne and Mothers Out Front, for having us. And I'm hoping you can hear me in the back. So Nancy touched on a lot of different levels that the West Roxbury folks had worked on in opposing this, and the fact that they're still out there fighting in the trenches, and they're still looking
Literally.
to the city of Boston to do the right thing.
Literally in the trenches.
Yeah,
Like
literally,
lying
yeah.
down in trenches
Yeah, that's-
and lying down so that
Yeah.
we have to be removed.
They have pictures. So Weymouth is not quite at that point yet, but this situation sort of came by my desk almost 2.5 years ago now. So we've been fighting for 2.5 years. And as a result, we've been able to push back Spectra, now Enbridge, their timetables by almost a year. And we're not done. But one of the things that Nancy touched on was this idea of, looking at our whole situation and looking at where can we take the fight? How can we fight? And ultimately fighting in the streets. So one of the things that we're looking at and targeting, of course, is the Global Warming Solutions Act and how the Baker administration is or is not following what the Supreme Court told them to follow as of last May. So the Global Warming Solutions Act was put into effect in 2008. And it basically states that by 2020, we have to cut our emissions by 25%. By 2050, 80%. These are very aggressive figures. And so when you look at that whole perspective, you have to say, okay, we have to keep cutting and cutting and cutting. And we're cutting things like cars, the emissions on cars, and we're looking at the power plants. They're decommissioning the coal plant down in Somerset. They're, looking at what are the power plants running on at this point. There's more and more solar coming online. The deep water wind that Representative Haddad has got going out off of the coast, that kind of thing, which is going to help us to cut those emissions and to keep cutting. The Supreme Judicial Court, because of a lawsuit brought by some children, said that, in fact, the Global Warming Solutions Act was not a suggestion. It's the law. And up until and that lawsuit started in 2012. Remember, I said it was signed in 2008. 2012 to 2014, 15, basically they'd done nothing about it. It was kind of a suggestion. But during that time, believe it or not, our emissions were going down. And the reason that they were going down, one of the biggest reasons in the state of Massachusetts, and we can all pat ourselves on the back for that, is conservation in the Commonwealth is extremely high. So whether you're talking about LED light bulbs or your Energy Star equipment, that kind of thing, it just kept going down. So in spite of the fact that the state wasn't taking its own advice and doing its own policy reviews, the emissions were going down. So the lawsuit was won, and the SJC said, no, this is the law, and you have to do it. And so Governor Baker is charged as the CEO of the Commonwealth with making sure that his policy people do the right thing, and that they write policy and laws and things that keep these emissions down. So there's a gaping hole in that I thought, well, how come I can see this and I'm not that bright? But what they've done is they've said, okay, we're looking at the power plants in the state, the cars in the state, the pipelines that are in your streets, from the heat maps and that kind of thing. But they are not regulating West Roxbury. They're not regulating a Weymouth compressor station, LNG tanks in Acushnet, a potential compressor station in Rehoboth. And going to a DEP hearing, I asked the question, well, did I miss something? How come you're not regulating the intrastate pipelines and things like that? And they said, oh, well, that's federal, so technically we can't do that. So Margaret and I were having a discussion. I said, yeah, but that's not federal air. This air is above the Commonwealth. This belongs to us. And so this is something that needs to be looked at. And we in Weymouth, they just gave the air quality permits, unfortunately, to Enbridge, and again, we'll be fighting that. But this is something that we might be looking into a little bit more heavily into how can you ignore this, and I'm talking millions and millions of cubic feet of pure methane that will just be put into the air from the LNG tanks, the M&R stations, the compressor stations, all of that, millions. So Governor Baker has basically said that there's nothing he can do about it.
It's federal.
It's federal. He can't do anything about it. And we said, no, that's not true. Because he can create a political climate for his DEP, for his EEA, for his coastal zone management, and say that, no, we need to follow the Global Warming Solutions Act. We have to write much more stringent laws and policy in order to get these numbers in line for 2020 and 2050. The Attorney General's report that Nancy was talking about also said that if this infrastructure was built, so now the Kinder Morgan pipeline, the Ned pipeline has gone down so far. There are still some lateral loops coming up from Connecticut that they're still fighting to get those out. But if the Spectra pipeline comes through, the Attorney General's report said the state will not meet the 2020 or 2050 goals. The court has said you have to meet those goals. So I'm not really sure what Governor Baker is thinking. He doesn't have a choice. The court is telling him you have to do this. So we have instituted phone calling and letter writing and things like that. There's actually a woman, I'll give a shout out to Andrea Honore, who has been having, have lunch with Andrea in the governor's office and has been sitting there for well over a month every day at lunchtime to remind Governor Baker that, Weymouth is still there and we haven't heard from you and you're not helping out. So the fights are from the governor's office all the way down. Tip O'Neill said all politics are local, and that is true. So the local people in Weymouth are fighting, but we fought with West Roxbury. We're working with Rehoboth and Acushnet and all of the pipeline fighters from here to New Jersey and beyond to try to stop the Atlantic Bridge project. Right now, just to give a little synopsis of the Atlantic Bridge, it's basically stopped. They do not have the water quality permits in New York. They do not have the permits in Weymouth to put that compressor in. Coastal Zone Management has them in a stay. The DEP Wetlands has them in a stay, so they really can't move right now. But even though both ends of this aren't operational and they have no permits, basically, they have received a notice to proceed construction in Connecticut. So that means they're trying to work in the middle and get that going, although both ends are not functioning. This is how insidious, I guess, they are, that they will do anything to get this going. And if they get the Atlantic Bridge, the Access Northeast isn't far behind. So local work, go up to the state government, go up to the governor, and then keep going up to Congressman Lynch or Senators Warren and Markey, who have worked with us on different things, and just keep fighting. But the Global Warming Solutions Act, I think, is one of the keys to this whole fight. So now, Margaret.
All right. So I have some slides to show you. I love the terminology that these companies come up with. It's just kind of humorous, Atlantic Bridge. Even the other word that you hear, Spectra or Enbridge, they use the word Algonquin, which, how dare they take the language of the Wampanoags and call it the Algonquin. It's always very interesting to see their terminology. So this is just a slide of how big Atlantic Bridge is, that it's 450 million, and it was approved by the FERC. We knew it was coming on January 25th, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, even though we sent in comments by the hundreds asking not for the compressor station to be put in Weymouth. And the capacity is huge. This is a build out. This is not maintenance. This is more. And the Attorney General showed that we don't need more. In fact, with conservation, I mean, I myself am I have gas, I use it to cook, but I'm using less. So conservation is bringing down the need for any of this build out. And this is a Spectra slide. This is right off their website to show how it is going to come from the fracked wells in Pennsylvania. And that's actually a new thing. Like, I've been in Weymouth over 40 years. When I turned on the stove 40 years ago, it wasn't fracked gas. Now it is. And like Nancy said, the fracking story is a whole story of how dangerous it is, how it affects the drinking water of the people that are living near the fracking wells in Pennsylvania, because the Marcellus Shale is a gold mine. They break open the shale and out comes both oil and gas. And they're bringing it up all the way through, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. And then where is it going to go? It's going out. It is not for New England. So here's some more data. Well, that third point is what I'm very interested in, that in the build out of this gas infrastructure are not just one compressor station for Weymouth, but two. And they try to hide this second one. They say, well, we're not doing Access Northeast, so don't talk about that. But it'll be right behind Atlantic Bridge, right side by side, and make the whole thing even more dangerous. There'll be a slide that I'll show you how close the homes are that it's coming up. Okay, so this is a Spectra Energy slide too. And it shows how the compressor stations are located. Those are all little, the existing compressor stations are all little squares. They're usually 40 to 50 miles apart, and there are thousands of them across the United States. And what it does is it pushes gas. So there is a huge glut of fracked methane coming from the Marcellus Shale region in Pennsylvania, and they want to get rid of it, and they want to sell it, and they want to push it fast and up the whole eastern seaboard and out. And you'll see that there's proof that it's not for New England, even though that's what they say. When we used to go to these, they call them scoping meetings, Spectra will come in to a community and hold an informational meeting and show you how lovely the compressor is going to be for your community. And they have these sandwiches out there and drinks, and they give you little free bags, shopping bags with Spectra Energy on it. And yeah, it is, yeah. All right, so here's some statistics. And where is this, where are these decatherms going? So 19.9% for Connecticut and Massachusetts, 10.9% for Maine, and then the rest is out of the country, 69.2%. So it's not to benefit New England, even though that is what they tell you at the scoping meetings, where they're handing you the free shopping bags and the ham sandwich. It's a lie. It's a blatant lie. This is what a compressor station looks like. And again, I have to kind of laugh at this image, because the image that Spectra Energy has put forth in Weymouth is a lovely building. It looks like a college library. But this, I was going to say crap. This, yeah, this stuff is inside of that college library. That's what the compressor station really looks like. That it is spewing fracked methane, and I've got into this fight because of the health issues. that it, even in their presentations, they'll tell you that there are VOCs. It's one of the first things I had to look up. Volatile organic chemicals. They'll admit that it does spew out this stuff. It's benzene, it's formaldehyde. These are things that affect the respiratory system. These are things that give children asthma. People that live near compressor stations wind up with rashes, nosebleeds, and respiratory issues. But they are often built in rural locations, away from densely populated areas. Usually they're on 50, 100 acres, big, we see pictures of them. Big open spaces, a lot of grass around it, or trees. Well, wait till you see what they're trying to do in Weymouth. Here's a slide that talks about something that happened recently in Weymouth, kind of undermining our belief that anything Spectra says about safety has to be taken with a grain of salt. Essentially, we don't believe them. They already have a metering and regulating station in the Fore River Basin at the site of the proposed compressor. That's been there since 1999. Well, we missed that. We should have been fighting that. But when you go over the Fore River Bridge, there's so many things that I say, like, where was I? How come I didn't fight that and that and that and that? Well, that's history. But this metering station that they have is owned by Spectra. And on January, I think it was the 7th of January, neighbors in the area smelled methane. And it went on for hours. And no one could decide, well, who's in charge? Who's going to stop it? Where is it coming from? Quincy was involved, fire department. Finally, after several hours, it was a Spectra release. It was a frozen valve that had broken with ice, and it released gas. Later, they were asked at a town council meeting to explain themselves. And we don't have to monitor small 1-inch valves. It's not required. We don't have to report the release. So there is really very little regulation on what they have to do. So no one was hurt, but it does make us not feel very safe, because there have been tremendous explosions from compressor stations. Pennsylvania, you can look it up. So another statistic on how big it's going to be, well, that's just the first one. The second one is coming right behind it, Access Northeast, which is going to be even bigger. And where is it sited? Next to a public park, next to a brand new bridge, next to a sewage treatment plant, and many other industrial facilities, which you'll see on the next slide. The bridge carries like 34,000 cars a day. It's not included in their environmental assessment. They don't have to include cars because they are not stationary. They have, there's such narrow regulations. If it was a stationary object, then it would be regulated. Now, all right, this is the slide that I love the most. This is the site. This is where the bridge is. This is where there are 7, count them 7, all around the site. So you can see the present Spectra M&R station. That's where they had the gas leak in January. That's the little red star is where they want to put the new compressor, 2 new compressors. The sewage treatment plant is right abutting it. I mean, the fence will be right between it, and it jeopardizes the sewage treatment for the whole Boston Harbor, the Boston Harbor cleanup. There's a palm oil factory. which is emitting its own stuff, where they are making glycerin. The New England fertilizer plant is taking sewage and turning it into pellets, emitting more stuff. The Clean Harbor Hazardous Waste Facility, now that's Braintree. And then there's an oil tank farm and another power plant. And then if you look, Calpine Power Plant is also all right there. I call it a cesspool. This is the Fore River Basin. And the red line that's coming through from the top, that is an existing high pressure gas line. And that's why they want to hook it up there, because they have this pipeline that's called the hub line, and they want to put the compressor there, and that is an ideal location for them to shoot all this extra gas up to Canada and probably elsewhere, Europe, wherever. Now, while we're looking at this, take a look at the little streets that are all around with little houses everywhere. 950 families within the mile radius. Many, many schools. I think the estimate is 13,000 children. See, usually compressor stations are on these big open fields, 50, 100 acres of just kind of open space. This is the first compressor station ever proposed to be in such a densely populated area. And it's unsafe, not just because of the explosion possibility, which they deny, but the daily 24/7 emissions of volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, fracked methane. It's unbelievable. FERC granted the permit, just like you said. Check.
That's what they do.
Yeah. So this is a terrific slide. In Quincy, which is a little bit north of the, just a little bit north of the palm oil factory, is an area of environmental justice. This is an area where these people have already been burdened with their situation, whether it's economics or environmental, and they should not have any more exposure. But that doesn't mean anything. No, it's just not to be taken under consideration. And there is something else that our wonderful graphic designer added. Do you see the little tank that's right under the bridge? It's in black. Mm-hmm. This is a place where big, huge tankers come in. I live near here. When those tankers come in, it's like a wall. It's like, you could be in your house and you actually feel when the tanker is coming. You don't have to even look out the window. It's just like this huge vibration of a wall. These are huge. And they come into the Fore River, and they are either they're either delivering to the palm oil factory. The tankers are also delivering gasoline to the oil tank farm. This is a very dangerous area. It's dangerous right now without adding a compressor station. This is the timeline of what we've been through, and it's still going on, of submitting the forms to different agencies, writing comments, going to open houses, knocking on doors, going to hearings. You can see we had a wonderful event when we, in May of 2016, thanks to Alice and her action to get the mayor of Weymouth to reject $47 million that was offered to the mayor. Yes. We called it a bribe. But we're so glad we did that, because it would have prevented the Conservation Commission from being against Spectra. If you took the money, there was a literal gag order that no town agency could say anything about Spectra in denying it, but the $47 million look good, you know, maybe new fire engines, a couple of school things. But we were so determined that you could not risk the health of children for $47 million. You know, what's the sense of giving them a new school if they all have asthma? So I think we broke his arm, literally. So it wasn't taken. The $47 million was rejected. And as a result, the Conservation Commission then went through their process of denying the wetlands permit, which is holding it up. This is holding it up. And even though the FERC has given the certificate, there are other permits that are outstanding. And it's giving us hope that at least we can delay this. At least that's what we have been doing. The last thing was February 2017. We hired our own lawyer, and we filed for a rehearing to Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we haven't heard back.
We have a tolling order.
Oh, yeah.
Standard operating
We have a
procedure.
tolling order.
Yeah. Maybe you want to explain that. Every time I think tolling, what?
It's a little complex, so the easiest way to say about the tolling order is FERC's way of saying, yeah, we're not going to think about that rehearing request for a while. We're just going to put that on the back burner. But in the meantime, Spectra could start construction. Now, in our case, they can't, because one of the conditions of the original certificate was they could not begin construction until they get the CZM determination of consistency, which won't happen until August, potentially. We're hoping it doesn't happen. So that they can't start construction, so they're kind of in this holding pattern. But the tolling order was issued out of a FERC that does not have a quorum, and so now we're taking them to court.
Good.
This is an issue that requires, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There's like just the language, just to figure out what tolling. I mean, no one speaks this way, you know? So it's become a real education in learning what the regulations are, learning what all the alphabet stuff is. And we have people that stand out at the site every Wednesday afternoon holding signs. We go to hearings. We have signs all over the town. Yeah, we are. Yeah,
The Grim Reaper.
yeah. The bottom where you see the incineration zone, that is actually part of the bridge, and it's the bridge. The new bridge hasn't opened yet. It's okay. So this I particularly like because it's been photoshopped. This electrical sign is at the bridge when the bridge is going to open because there's a big ship coming in. It'll say expect delays. But with a little Photoshop, you could put expect delays Spectra. So we haven't lost. And we have delayed them because they expected to have that compressor functioning November 2017. And they haven't even started construction. So, yeah. So my end is that we have a wonderful website, nocompressor.com, which it really has a lot of information. And I wanted to end with something I heard an applied anthropologist say, that it's up to local communities to take personal responsibility for what is being proposed where you live. That in the end, climate change will affect the local community. So we have to start now and make the shift.
Thanks, Margaret.
Well, so I think what you said, I think very well dovetails with some of what I've been thinking. I mean, I think right now, as local communities, as a country, as a world, we're really at a crossroads. In some ways, I think we've been walking down the wrong way of the crossroad a little bit. We might need to think about that. But we have a choice where we can keep living as we've been living, and then leave a disaster to our children, and hope that they'll be able to figure it out, that they'll be able to survive. And climate change is really not just in the future. I had a conversation with somebody who's talking about many places in India and Africa, places where it's just a little bit warmer than here in New England, where people are already struggling to decide how much water should go to people, how much water should go to agriculture, how much water should go to animals. How do we balance all of these different needs that we have? Because there's not enough water already. And then there are other communities where people have already had to face the fact that their island will not survive. Their islands are being eroded right now. So climate change is not just in the future, it is now for many places in the world. So we have that choice. We could stay on the path that we're on and just sort of see what happens, or we can take the time now to reimagine our way of life, and in the process, I think, reclaim our democracy, because I think, unfortunately, too much of our political system is tied up into the old way of doing things, and it's like the Titanic, they see the iceberg, but they just don't know how to turn themselves around. And it might take some of us, even if we're in little dinghies, right, saying, we're not heading in that terrible direction. So what I think is exciting about it, and I try to remind people, is that when I say we need to reimagine our way of life, people are like, oh my gosh. But I think that to me, that's something that's possibly really exciting. We could have fracked gas under the ground that's giving us asthma and exposing us to chemicals that we don't even know. Or we could wake up every morning and look at the solar panels on our roof, or look out in the ocean and see wind turbines and know exactly where our power is coming from. I say it's the God-given power that we already have that we could tap into. So I think, one of the big lies that we're told is that pipelines are about a transition. But the reality is, when you put a pipeline in the ground, you mean for it to be used for the next 50 years.
Yeah. Right.
And for those of us who, I don't know how many people have read, UMass Boston came out with a study that basically says by 2060, every high tide will be a major flooding event for Boston. Every high tide. And I haven't seen the statistics for Winthrop, but you've got a lot more water out here than we even have in Boston. So I assume the same thing, that every high tide will be a moment where people can't get out of their homes, where neighbors have to figure out how to evacuate. And so we could leave those pipes in the ground until we literally can't get to them because they're submerged underwater. And that just doesn't seem to make sense. So I think the reality is that we need to push our local governments to put people first, to protect our children, and I think we need to do justice by our sisters and brothers around the world. It's not okay for us to create a problem and then say, oh, too bad for the people in the Caribbean, too bad for people in Africa, too bad for islands in South Asia. That's not who we would want to be, and I think, unfortunately, the way that we're living right now is pushing us in that direction. So I think it's really, important for us to look at this not just as a political issue or an economic issue, but it's really a moral issue. We have to make some decisions about who we are and what matters, and then we have to stand for those things. Nancy talked a lot about, the issue in West Roxbury was that when all those systems failed, we had to say, no, we can't just go home and act like this is okay. It's a moral issue, it's wrong, and we're going to demonstrate that it's wrong by putting our bodies on the line. And I ended up getting arrested on my birthday, so it was pretty interesting. My husband was at City Hall, and people were on Facebook trying to give me, happy birthday requests, but then seeing me get arrested, and they were like, what's going on? But I think that this is, again, we really, really, really are at a crossroads. And if Congress and the EPA and the president and all world leaders don't get it, it's up to us as everyday citizens to sort of say, if you don't get it, we're going to help you to get it. Because that's the same thing that happened in the abolition movement. That's the same thing that happened in the civil rights. Like every movement that things have moved forward, it's often been everyday people having to get their leaders to recognize that this is not something that can be put off till later, or we can delay and we'll get around to it some other point. It's something that we have to do right now. So I was recently I was at West Roxbury most of the summer and all the way up until they closed that last piece in the road, and then days after being gathering with folks there, I was in Standing Rock in North Dakota, and it was powerful to be there because what I think was amazing in that struggle is the recognition that this is actually not just about climate change. This is about the fact that our economic system has often decided that some people don't matter. That Native people from the very beginning of this country's history didn't matter. That I've been here much longer, probably my family has been in this country probably longer than most people in this room, but we didn't come here by choice because our lives and our choices didn't matter. And so there's also an opportunity for us to ask the question, how do we create security? How do we build wealth? How do we sustain ourselves and our families without throwing anybody under the bus or, quite frankly, under the trench? And I think that was a lot of what was being raised at Standing Rock. People were calling out the fact that the things that matter have often not been put first. The lives of real people, the protection of a planet. There may never be a plant again if we allow it to become extinct. I say to my parishioners, if God thought that turtle should be here, who am I to decide that it doesn't have a right to be here? If this is a gift to us, if God said that it was good, who am I to decide that it should go down to build another mall or because we want to drive bigger cars? There's a point at which we have to ask some questions about what matters, and I think we've gotten lost from those questions. So what I think you're seeing here with all of us is people who are reawakening to what really matters, and to say, we're not willing to let it all go down, for the next trinket or the next, thing that we think that we need, which we all really recognize that we kind of maybe don't need, and then throw away. And so I think we really do have a choice. And unfortunately, I've seen too many of our elected officials make the wrong choices. To decide the expediency of the moment is more important than the long-term future. And every species, the first and most important thing is to survive, to make sure that your children live into the future. And when you've lost track of that, you're a very sick species when you've lost that will to survive, that will to make sure that you can continue into the future. So I don't think we can go back to our old way. At the national level, people are saying we're going to revive coal. We can't go back to an old way that we know is deadly. But we also can't stick our heads in the sand and sort of say maybe something will happen. I do have sympathy and real empathy with folks in coal country who do not know how they're going to live. I know what it is to live in a community where people suffer from high levels of unemployment. It's not pretty. And so I do think we have to ask, not just how do we, bring down the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, but how do we allow people in coal country to have jobs that are going to sustain them? And how do we allow people in my community to also have jobs so that people are not ending up incarcerated because they have no other way to sustain themselves? If we're going to reimagine things, let's go all out and try to reimagine it far better than what we have right now. And I think that's the real opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to allow children to recognize that food doesn't come from the grocery store, but it actually comes from the ground. To just know what it means to breathe clean air. I think sometimes we've forgotten, and then you have to go somewhere else to be like, well, this is what it tastes like and feels like to not have chemicals that I can't even pronounce in my air, right? These are gifts, they are important. And so I think a lot of our work is not just about the specifics of these pipelines. We do have to fight, but what we're really fighting for is a better way of life and a preservation of our species, and we have to act like it when we walk into the room. And I hope that we can convince some of the folks who haven't been with us. I think it's a spiritual thing. I still pray that they awaken and join us. I'm a minister, so I can never give up on anybody. I always have to believe, and I do, that transformation is possible. But if you aren't transforming in the moment, I might just also have to hold you accountable while I wait for that transformation to happen. And I'm glad to be here with folks from different communities, because I also think we call ourselves a commonwealth. Sometimes we don't act like we have things in common. I was in a meeting not so long ago where we were talking about the flooding that was going to happen in Boston, and it was a lot of business leaders, and suddenly everybody started talking about, well, we need to start talking about this seawall.
Oh.
And there's this big proposal about a seawall. And yes, the seawall would probably shelter Boston, but it would basically sacrifice the communities of Winthrop and Quincy. And as a Bostonian, I cannot get behind something that would cause death and destruction to other communities. And so as we awaken, we can't be NIMBY in the way that we approach things, where we fight for our community but not for each other. And so I see how these connections are being formed between communities, where we say, we are going to stand together because we believe that a better way is possible, and we will not be divided, and we will not accept short-term gains, even if it is as attractive as $47 million. You can't mortgage your future. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to engage, but I think I think it's important for us to remember what we're really fighting for here, and at every turn to invite more people to join what I think is going to be an amazing, not just an energy revolution, but a community revolution, something that brings us together and helps us reimagine what it means to live together, and to put the things that really matter first.
Ready for questions?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to walk around with the mic. If you have a question, anybody have one? Mary Alice?
Hi, thank you for coming to Winthrop and doing such a wonderful presentation for all of us. But I have to say I'm a newbie in a lot of this. We have just started a Mother's Out Front in Winthrop just within the past few months. And I have learned immensely so many things that it's almost overwhelming. But I was just wondering if you could explain for people who would be watching, to explain what exactly fracking means, and also an understanding. I only knew of fracking when it dealt with oil. I never knew that there was fracking that dealt with gas and the emission of methane gas. So maybe you could explain so that people could actually understand some of the information that you were giving us that was just wonderful, so that they could have a better understanding of what's being spoken about. Thank you.
Well, I know a little bit about it. You need this very special shale, and because when you break it open, it releases both oil and gas. And it sounds like a wonderful idea. It does. I mean, in theory, it is a bonanza that we in this country have this shale. And if you break it open, you could get energy, fuel. It's a terrific concept. The only thing is, the process that they're using is not not a good process. Now, perhaps it could, I mean, although I don't think so, because I wouldn't want to have any more extraction of fossil fuels, but they use cement pipes that go down into the ground and then put millions of gallons of water into the pipe to break open the shale, and then they can extract the oil and gas. In the process, the water that they're using can be contaminated, and cement pipes over time do fail. They crack and leak. So the process, and the EPA has just done in December of 2016, they've done a study on the effect of fracking on drinking water. So that's new.
So you might notice that almost none of us use the term natural gas, and that's because there are some places where you could claim it's natural, right? There are some places where the gas is literally bubbling up to the surface, right? And that's what was happening for hundreds of years. That's what people were collecting. Gas that was literally bubbling up to the surface. Well, most of that's gone. And so people started to say, well, where does it come from? What if we dug all the way down to where that gas is bubbling up from? Could we get more of it? And when we say how far down you have to go, you're literally going beneath the water table. I mean, they're going very, very, very far down, pushing towards our core, right? The question is, should we be doing that, right? Is that safe? So I had a friend who's from Oklahoma. They've been digging down in Oklahoma in many, many different places, extracting this gas and oil, and then putting these drums of all the contaminated water back under the ground. Oklahoma, did you know Oklahoma is a place that has earthquakes? Well, before about 2008, well, depends on how you count them, but they were a place that had earthquakes. And yet, in 2015, they had over 800 earthquakes. Some things, if it bubbles to the surface, let's talk about it. But at the point that you have to go down towards the Earth's core, beneath the water table, you're taking water. Water always circulates. You may have a molecule of water in your body that your great-grandmother had. We circulate that water. That's always what we've been doing. At the point that you're starting to stick it below the water table, you're literally taking water out of circulation in a time when we don't have enough fresh water. There's nothing natural about that. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And so the challenge with fracking is, yes, technology allows us to do things we couldn't do before, but that doesn't mean it's always good. Technology is allowing us to kill more people than we ever did before. That's not a good thing, right? So yes, it is possible, but we have no idea whether or not that's going to cause a level of disturbance because it's never been done before. But our early signs from Oklahoma, our early signs from contamination in Pennsylvania, is that it leaves damage potentially greater and certainly more long-lasting than whatever benefit we're getting in the short term. And I mean, it's just, again, that simple thing we've all learned in our lives. Quick fixes usually come back to bite you. This one's probably going to have a pretty big bite.
I just wanted to ask just one thing that I did learn, that when you are digging in the shale for gas, I'm going to say, which like I said, I didn't realize fracking was connected to gas. I have learned that methane gas is released, whereas at the time that you're actually digging for the gas itself, that methane gas is released into our atmosphere. as opposed, and please correct me, sometimes I'm not always best with my information, but whereas opposed that fracking of oil, we have the emission, the oil comes out, and then it's the burning of that fuel, or that causes the emission of CO2, which causes the global warming that I think that we know, the greenhouse effect. But it's the methane that I have learned to be more as equally frightened about being released because it's not monitored. So thank you very much.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you for answering.
And attempts to get it monitored in the Obama administration were on the books until we had a change of administration. It was late recognized in the Obama administration that methane gas was as potent, actually much more potent greenhouse gas creator than CO2. And with that late recognition, the Obama administration attempted to put into effect regulations that would address the methane emissions problem, which we have right now, and it's specific to frack gas as well as a lot of other areas. It's gone. It's
Yes,
off.
I know.
That's off the books. What's interesting, what you might find interesting, is that it's that fracking, which is fracturing shale, was a Department of Energy project that was designed to address an expected shortage of fossil fuels in the United States. Okay, so originally the idea was, where are we going to get energy? Where are we going to get fossil fuels when it runs out of, when we don't have imports, or when the Saudi threat becomes too much for us to bear and we have to think of other alternatives? This was a solution. Okay, but at this point in our climate history, as we move to renewables, both because they're the right thing to do and because it provides jobs, many more jobs than the fossil fuel industry does domestically, certainly, the issue of domestic fossil fuel production is not a critical issue for us any longer, which is why the movement to export is happening so fast. Everyone knows that we have to go to renewables. Everyone knows this. Exxon knows this, okay? Exxon knew this, okay? But they're out for their profit. They are literally putting profits over people. And the sad and obscene fact of the matter is that the regulatory process is failing us. It is insufficient to protect our environment and our health and safety. And that's where we should be putting pressure on Charlie Baker and his cronies, because he will stand there and say, it's a federal project, we have no jurisdiction over it, whatever the feds decide, it has to go through. It has to go through to the interstate level. Once those projects go online, whatever happens in the intrastate level, that becomes our jurisdiction then. That's where we're putting pressure now on the Department of Health, the Boston Public Health Commission, because once we're no longer in the interstate and we're in the intrastate, then whatever the hell happens there, that's our problem. And Charlie Baker, that's your problem too. And you need to protect our health and safety. That's your job. Under Massachusetts Regulation 111, that's your job, okay? Attorney General, that's your job. So we're starting to put more pressure there. And one of the things that we're doing to address that, not just at the local level, which you can do with your local public health department, which they've done successfully in Deerfield. They just kept these projects out of Deerfield because the public health department said, no, this is going to damage our local this is damaging to our local health. No, you can't come in here, okay? They came into Boston through all kinds of snaky methods, right? But now, if there's an issue and there's an air quality issue, well, we have to shut that down, okay? And through our efforts with the mass healthcare providers against frack gas, of which Susan is a member, we asked our representative, Ed Coppinger, to put on the books a requirement that all siting board decisions, all energy facility siting board decisions that review projects like this, that review the West Roxbury project, that review any project that addresses energy facility siting, have to have a member of the Department of Public Health and another member from another advocate from the state office. And that law, we managed to get 39 sponsors for the first time out, and you can ask your representatives and your elected officials to support that. And you can call Charlie Baker and say, we want this, and I have handouts that I can give you about that.
Oh, question from the press.
Thanks. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role of Charlie Baker and Maura Healey in the pipeline issue. You know, you have sort of the two of the biggest, most powerful politicians in the state that are part of the same administration, although somewhat at odds with each other on this issue. And I'm wondering, as far as Baker goes, has he taken a more active role in promoting the pipelines, or has his stance just been like, it's not, you know, there's nothing I can do about it? He's sort of removed himself in the fight. And on Healy's side, has she taken a more active role? It sounds like she put forward this report that said that, you know, we don't really need the gas, and that's been useful to you in this fight. But has she actually, you know, used her bully pulpit and said, you know, this is something that we need to stop?
I can address the Charlie Baker issue. Governor Baker, prior to the NED pipeline, that's the Northeast Direct Kinder Morgan pipeline, prior to that kind of going down, he's on WGBH once a month. And so we do bird dog him and get people to call in and, you know, talk about pipelines or, you know, the compressor station in Weymouth or whatever. And prior to that going down, he kind of was very vague about pipelines and gas and all that kind of thing. And then when the NED pipeline went down, one of our members got in on the phone and said, well, you know, now that the Kinder Morgan pipeline has gone down, you know, let's get rid of Spectra and rid of the Weymouth compressor station. And he literally threw us under the bus and said that basically that now that Kinder Morgan was off the table, we had to have Spectra, that this was, you know, something that we had to have. Subsequently, there's a blog called DSMOG blog, and the reporter is a man by the name of Itai Vardi, and he's a professor of sociology, I believe, at UMass Boston, as well as a muckraker. But we've done a lot of work with him, you know, talking about information and things like that. So now I've lost my train of thought, but some of the articles that he has put out there are about conflict of interest. And we couldn't figure out why. You know, we called Baker's office, we wrote letters, we did this, we did that, we did the other thing, and just no response. And Margaret got in on one of the phone calls and, you know, said, well, you know, we've been calling your office and, you know, trying to get a response or whatever, and we delivered on Groundhog's Day 11,000 signatures that had come in from the pipeline tax issue, and then another close to 2,000 postcards from the Fore River Basin area to talk about the compressor station. He said, well, I didn't get those signatures. I didn't get that information. A couple of weeks later, there was a DSMOG article that connected Charlie Baker very closely with the lobbyists that are working for Enbridge, Spectra Enbridge, one of whom is the former Governor Weld. So we know what we're looking at on a political basis with Governor Baker, but the bottom line is that in New York, Governor Cuomo and Attorney General Schneiderman were able to shut down the Constitution Pipeline. And they were able to do it by basically kind of ordering the DEP in New York to say, no, you can't have the water quality permits. Oh, well,
That was the end of that.
done deal.
Yeah.
So.
And then as far as Maura Healy goes, she is an advocate, and she's an advocate for the ratepayer, which is one of the reasons why she conducted this study, and its determination was that there was no need for additional fossil fuel infrastructure in the state of Massachusetts. So that was independently done. You know, Charlie Baker had no comment. We all use that, of course, as leverage when we go forward with the kinds of arguments that we go forward with. She has advocated otherwise as well. She requested that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission review all of the projects as a whole to determine whether, in an aggregated way, they supported the statement that there was a need. Because what happens with each of these projects is they're presented in a segmented way. And so FERC says, okay, they have a DPU filing that says they need this amount of, you know, this number of decatherms for this service for this period of time. Okay, you got it, okay? But what happens then is that in another location in the state, they do the same thing and they use the same kind of arguments. But if you put all these things together, the result is, no you don't, okay? You don't need all of these things. This is the fig leaf that they keep throwing on top of this energy need statement, okay? And Charlie Baker buys it. Why do you think he buys it? I don't know. And by the way, Bill Weld is his mentor, so that's what plays into the whole Bill Weld, Charlie Baker business. So she requested that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission review all of these Massachusetts proposed projects as a whole before giving their approval, and nothing happened. Nothing happened because the FERC doesn't have to do that. The Federal Energy Regulatory doesn't have to.
So I think one of the key things is this notion that I've heard both from the Baker administration, and I'll be honest, I've also heard it from some of the environmental folks at the city of Boston. They call natural gas, which at this point we know is not natural, a bridge fuel.
Right.
It's going to help us get to where we need to go. Okay.
Atlantic Bridge.
We all know that the time is running out on where we need to go. We don't have 50 years to get it together. They would all admit that. So then why would you put infrastructure that's going to last for 50 years under the ground? If you need a 5 to 7 year bridge, why would you make a 50-year solution? So if we need a bridge, I'm willing to pay a little extra, just give a short term. But the problem is that they're doing something that's going to have long, because of course, once you put it in there, it's not going to be easy to turn it off.
Right.
In 5 years, are we going to go, thanks for the bridge, turn it off? And if that's the case, then why aren't we building more, offshore wind turbines? We have a wealth of offshore wind resources. All of Massachusetts' homes could be powered by offshore wind.
Especially in Winthrop.
Right. The wind is there. The technology exists, but we can't quite figure out how to get that done. And somehow we can invest in pipelines that will last for 50 years to help us transition. So I think there's just a fallacy in the argument. And the reality is they're trying to protect their friends, right? And we've all had moments in our own lives, in our own families, where we all tell ourselves a lie and then we just keep it going every Thanksgiving and Christmas after Thanksgiving and So there's a point at which we have to say, the time for transition is now. Let's put the money on the things that we know. I'd love to build turbines that are going to last for 50 years. In 50 years, those turbines are still going to be worth it, rather than putting a pipeline under the ground that in theory is going to help us transition to something else in the long term. Well, why don't we just build the long-term stuff now? I think they all use that logic. It's a flawed logic. I get it. They're trying to, satisfy a lot of, competing demands. I think the reality is we have to make that logic more costly. We need to say, as citizens, we are not interested in dumping money into pipelines that are going to last for 50 years when we could be using that same money to subsidize solar. We could be using that same money to build wind turbines. They're doing this at the same time that they cut subsidies for solar because they said that industry is okay, right? So then if it's doing so well, then we shouldn't need all of this natural gas infrastructure because it's doing so well that we're exceeding our targets. And that's kind of, unfortunately, the political game that gets played. But I've had great conversations with folks from the Attorney General's office and feel like they're doing a great job, but the governor is still caught in that logic.
Okay, I think we've run out of time, and I, for one, could ask you several questions. But from the bottom of my heart, Margaret, Alice, Nancy, Reverend Mariama, inspiring and kept me off the ledge. So thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.